What if one missile could flip the balance of power in the Middle East overnight? When Iran launches hundreds of next-gen ballistic missiles toward Tel Aviv, it doesn't just shake the ground, it shatters the illusion of control. A food reserve reduced to ash. A prime minister in tears. A nation brought to its knees. This isn't fiction, it's a mirror. Watch till the end, because the final blow isn't what you expect. In Tel Aviv, the night always had its own music, a rhythm crafted from chattering cafes, honking cars stuck in perpetual roundabout arguments, and the occasional blip from a phone alert nobody really read. This was the city that didn't sleep because it didn't want to. A city that had forgotten what it meant to flinch. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu stood at the panoramic window of his government suite, gazing out at the dense spread of lights that glittered like misplaced stars. He didn't blink. Maybe it was pride. Maybe it was fatigue. Or maybe it was denial wearing a perfectly tailored suit. The economy was limping but painted in strong numbers. Security was on edge but wrapped in silence. The protests had died down after a few water cannons and generous distractions. To the world, Israel was a fortress. But a fortress built on dry grass, and tonight, a spark had already been lit far across the desert. Unbeknownst to him, Iran wasn't just planning. It was already counting down. Under the sand-scarred surface of Iranian missile silos, engineers moved with the solemn precision of surgeons. There was no shouting, no dramatic "are you sure?" Just the click of keys, the locking of launch panels, the calculated prayer of men who had rehearsed apocalypse. The decision had already been made 3 weeks prior, sealed after a strike that turned an Iranian research lab into a crater and whispers of Mossad agents sipping tea in Tehran. But this was not a slap on the wrist. This was the return of the slap, times 100, with a glove dipped in steel. "Commence launch," the Iranian general said, not dramatically, but like someone announcing lunch break. Because when you've buried anger for a decade, revenge becomes a routine. A total of 368 ballistic missiles tore through the crust of Earth in synchronized fury. Some bore warheads. Some carried payloads designed to scramble radars. A few even whispered through the wind with such stealth that Israel's famed Iron Dome mistook them for clouds. As the missiles crossed skies over Syria, Jordan, and toward the Mediterranean coast, satellites blinked. Tel Aviv was still sleeping. The dome hadn't woken up. At 2:17 a.m., everything changed. Sirens. The kind that didn't just scream, they punched their way into your chest and sat there like an anxious god. Buildings that moments before bathed in peaceful neon were now outlined in crimson pulses. Families ran from bedrooms to basements. Dogs barked. Babies cried. And somewhere in the distance, a radio DJ tried to calm the city with jazz. He didn't last long. The first wave of missiles arrived not as a line, but a wave. A tide of engineered thunder designed not to knock on the door of Tel Aviv's defenses, but to kick it in with steel boots. Booms rang out, not in order, not with mercy, but with chaos. One missile hit the edge of the military district, creating a crater that swallowed a 10-story building like it was sugar in coffee. Another found the highway junction, cutting the city's main artery like scissors through a ribbon. But the one that mattered the most was number 106. Number 106 didn't care for symbolism. It wasn't aimed at soldiers. It wasn't coded for defense grids. It didn't chase tanks or airfields. It did something worse. It hit the National Food Reserve, Israel's largest food storage complex, buried beneath layers of reinforced walls and disguised beneath what looked like an ordinary logistics depot. The explosion didn't just obliterate steel and grain. It unhinged a nation. Silos that had stood full for over 20 years, grain bunkers sealed since peace talks that never worked, cans of emergency supplies stacked by the thousands gone. Fire licked up the wheat dust, and flames turned lentils into blackened marbles of defeat. Israel had always prided itself on being prepared, on being resilient. But now, food was ash, and panic would follow like a shadow. At 3:02 a.m., Netanyahu watched the live feed as the barn collapsed in on itself like a dying lung. He dropped his glass. Not metaphorically. Literally. The Prime Minister of Israel had not cried since the night his party nearly lost a crucial election. That night, he teared up only a little quietly behind a door, and quickly blamed it on allergies. But this was different. He was not surrounded by aides anymore. They had scattered to war rooms. The intelligence chief was in hiding somewhere underground. His secretary Mira tried to offer him coffee and was met with a stare so hollow it could have echoed. Benjamin Netanyahu stood alone in his chamber, a screen in front of him replaying the slow, tragic fall of the nation's largest food reserve. He sank into his chair. His face no longer firm, no longer charismatic. Just blank. And then it came. A single sob. The sound was awkward, like a man trying to laugh but remembering there was nothing funny left. The corners of his mouth twitched down. His shoulders sagged. And then he cried, not the elegant press conference appropriate kind, but the ugly human kind. The kind where your nose runs and you don't care. Where your tie feels like a noose and your hands don't know where to go. This is what we did to them, he murmured to no one. This is what Gaza sees every day. His voice trailed off as the monitor switched feeds, now showing supermarkets being stormed by panicked citizens, people punching each other over canned soup, a man crying over a destroyed falafel shop like it was a cathedral. The Prime Minister blinked. Not because he was shocked, but because the reality was too large to fit into one mind. He, the architect of firm policies and concrete walls, now saw his country cracked like glass. Somewhere in a bunker below, a general muttered, "We've got retaliation plans." But Netanyahu didn't respond. His mind was drifting, not to retaliation, but to a memory. He once visited a mosque in East Jerusalem for a political photo op. A child had offered him a date fruit and smiled. Netanyahu had declined, the cameras watching. But that smile, it haunted him now. That same smile, he realized, probably disappeared the day a drone hit that child's home. The tears returned, quiet now, bitter, exhausted. And for the first time in decades, Benjamin Netanyahu looked out the window and saw his nation not as chosen, not as fortified, but as fragile. A knock came at the door. "Sir," Mira said cautiously, "there's something else, you should see." He turned, his face still wet. "What now?" "They hit the gas terminals. Sir. No power coming in to half the grid." Netanyahu laughed. Only this time, it wasn't bitter. It was broken. Maybe we're all Palestinians now. Dawn didn't rise in Tel Aviv. It staggered in, like a drunk who had lost a bet with the night. The sky was the color of burnt paper, the air still coughing up black smoke like the city had tried to inhale peace and choked on war instead. The food barn explosion had become more than just a strategic loss, it was psychological. Symbolic. A gut punch to a nation used to being the puncher, not the punched. And the people knew it. You could smell the panic in the streets, thick, sour and desperate. By 7 a.m., supermarkets were chaos. Not just lines. Riots. People wrestled for rice like it was gold. A man slapped a teenager over powdered milk. A woman collapsed in the spices aisle because someone screamed there's no more bread. Even though there was. The scream alone was enough. Every self-proclaimed prepared citizen now realized just how unprepared they were. Emergency apps crashed from overload. Online delivery services posted the same message. Due to unprecedented national disruption, we cannot fulfill your request for peanut butter. In Haifa, a radio host cracked a joke live on air. If you want to find bread, try Gaza. Apparently, it's quieter there today. The government didn't laugh. Not because it wasn't funny, because it was. Meanwhile, in the security chamber beneath the Knesset, Netanyahu sat slouched in a chair he usually stood confidently behind. Maps were glowing on the wall, dotted in red, each red marking a hit. And there were a lot of dots. A colonel offered him a data tablet. "Sir, the damage to the reserve zones is at 83%. 83% of the food?" "No, sir. 83% of the zones. The food? Try 95. Netanyahu exhaled the way a balloon does when it gives up. He stood up. "We need to talk to someone. Anyone. America? The Saudis? I don't care if we have to call Iceland. We need aid. Water. Wheat. Anything." A general cleared his throat. "We could ask the UN." Silence. Then, Netanyahu squinted, and for the first time in years, said the most controversial phrase of his career. "Maybe we should." The Tel Aviv rice panic became an instant chapter in future history books. By noon, the word rice was trending higher than celebrity breakups and football scores. Videos of grandmothers fist-fighting in corner stores were racking up millions of views per hour. A man tried to trade his Rolex for a sack of basmati. A teenager started a fake rumor that pasta caused blindness, just to keep others away from the last box of spaghetti. Meanwhile, Palestinian vendors across the wall were watching with dry humor. One shopkeeper in Ramallah leaned on his counter, sipping coffee and watching Israeli news footage on a cracked screen. He laughed and muttered, "Now you know what it's like to watch your shelves empty after a missile lands 5 blocks from your house." Another posted a video online. "Dear Tel Aviv, welcome to real life. Sincerely, Gaza." To be fair, some Israelis began questioning everything. Not just their politics. Their perspective. A viral TikTok from a university student named Liran showed him standing in a burning convenience store, holding up a single carrot. "This is my dinner. We bombed their homes, and now the sky bombed our food. I guess karma is gluten-free." And then came the real kicker. A photo leaked from inside the food reserves before the explosion, showing thousands of crates labeled "Donated International Aid for Palestine." They had been sitting in Israeli-controlled storage the entire time. The internet exploded. The hypocrisy hit harder than the missile itself. Netanyahu's image, already cracking, began to rot in real time. By late afternoon, Tel Aviv resembled a post-apocalyptic film, but without the zombies. Just angry people, empty streets, smoke-stained windows, and politicians running out of lies. Electricity cuts rolled in. Water pressure dropped. And someone hacked the digital billboard above Azrieli Mall to flash. "No dome can save you from hunger." Even the usual stoic Israeli media couldn't hide it anymore. Anchors stuttered. Analysts wept. One reporter got so flustered, he just stopped reading the teleprompter and said, "I don't know what we're doing anymore. I really don't." Meanwhile, Netanyahu held a private meeting with his inner circle. Or what was left of it. Several ministers had quietly fled to Cyprus under pre-scheduled diplomatic trips. A few others pretended to be sick. And Defense Minister Dov Meir? He just stopped answering his phone. So Netanyahu sat with 2 generals, a nervous translator, and his old friend Gideon who ran logistics. "We're going to run out of gas next," Gideon said plainly, scribbling figures on a yellow notepad. "Most terminals are either hit or frozen in lockdown. No movement. If we don't reroute ships, we lose power to 3 cities by Thursday." "Are we at war or in collapse?" the PM snapped. "Both, sir," the general said. "And in that order." And finally, Netanyahu broke into a nervous chuckle. Not because he found it funny, but because he realized he no longer knew the difference. "Do we retaliate?" he asked the room. The silence said, "Retaliate with what? Empty cans and excuses?" Outside, the sun began to sink, dragging what was left of normalcy with it. People weren't thinking about Iran anymore. They were thinking about dinner. Or more accurately, the lack of it. By the time the sun dragged itself back up over the scorched skyline of Tel Aviv, the diplomatic phone lines were already overheating. Israel wasn't asking anymore, it was begging. With its food storage turned into hot rubble, electricity rationed like cigarettes in prison, and protests boiling in cities that once mocked protests elsewhere, Netanyahu's team turned to the only thing left untouched by missiles, the phone. The first call went to Washington. No answer. Well, technically there was an answer, just not the kind Israel was used to. The US State Department issued a statement that might as well have been written by a librarian. "We are monitoring the situation closely. All sides must exercise restraint." Restraint? Tel Aviv was in flames, and Washington was busy monitoring? Netanyahu, red-eyed and hoarse, picked up the phone himself, bypassing the formalities. When a junior advisor to the president finally answered, he spat, "Would you be monitoring if this happened to New York? To Los Angeles? This is Tel Aviv." The voice on the other end replied, "With all due respect, Mr. Prime Minister, you monitored Gaza for years." Click. Next came Europe. Paris gave condolences. Berlin offered discussions. London said it was a complicated conflict. The Prime Minister briefly fantasized about throwing his office printer out the window. The irony was thick enough to spread on toast, if anyone still had toast. Only one country offered direct help: Hungary. They offered 2 pallets of canned beans, a doctor, and a forklift that didn't work uphill. The Israeli cabinet began to quietly mutter what they'd never dared say aloud: "Maybe we're on our own." Across the wall, in the narrow strip long forgotten by peace, the air smelled different in Gaza. Not of smoke. Not of chemical dust. Just stillness. For the first time in what felt like centuries, the bombings weren't on their side. Children sat on rooftops and looked west. Not at incoming jets, but rising smoke columns from Tel Aviv. Old men turned on the radio and didn't hear sirens warning them to run, but sirens warning them to reflect. A bakery in Rafah still baking flatbread despite power cuts played a clip of Netanyahu crying on TV. "Turn it up," someone said. People watched, not in joy, not in hate, but in something stranger: recognition. For decades, Gaza had screamed. Now, Gaza listened. And it heard Israel panicking. Hungry. Scared. Disoriented. One boy asked his father, "Will they invade us again?" His father laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because there was no fuel to invade anything. "They don't even have bread," he said. On social media, Gazan influencers, long silenced by algorithmic invisibility, suddenly had an audience. A viral video showed 2 girls eating lunch on a blanket overlooking the border, holding up a sign. "Want to trade food for missiles?" It was sarcastic. It was sharp. And it hit millions of Israeli views. Tel Aviv watched Gaza watching them. The role reversal was so surreal it couldn't be explained. Only felt. At 8 p.m., every major Israeli network prepared for a nationwide address by Prime Minister Netanyahu. Rumors swirled. He would declare martial law. Or national emergency. Or maybe even resignation. The cameras were ready. The podium polished. The lights adjusted. Netanyahu stepped out wearing a navy blue suit that had survived too many scandals. His eyes were swollen, not from crying, but from not sleeping for 3 days. He stood before the nation, hands gripping the sides of the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. He cleared his throat. And then, nothing. Not a word. Not one. He opened his mouth. Closed it. Blinked. Tried again. A shallow breath came out, followed by silence. The live feed kept rolling. Millions watched, holding their breath. Some leaned forward. Some whispered, "Say something." But he didn't. He just stood there, shoulders slowly sinking, like a statue that remembered it was made of sand. Finally, his mouth moved. Only 2 words. "I'm sorry." He stepped back. And walked away. No anthem. No closing. No applause. Just silence. And the sound of a country finally understanding what it had lost. In the days that followed Netanyahu's 2-word speech, the country did not descend into madness. It had already descended. Instead, it entered something far stranger: stillness. No new missiles fell. No warplanes roared overhead. No declarations. No angry retaliation. Iran had made its point, not through occupation, not through propaganda, but through silence. The kind of silence that echoes louder than explosions. Tel Aviv was a different city now. Grocery shelves were hollowed out like open wounds. ATM machines were dark. There were whispers of looting in the north, bartering in the south. Restaurants, once packed with chatter and cutlery, now served memories instead of meals. The laughter was gone. The music faded. The Wi-Fi, of all things, had started stuttering. That hit people hardest. The Prime Minister remained mostly unseen. Holed up. Whispered about. Every now and then, someone said he walked the halls of the Knesset in his socks, muttering to himself, holding a map like it owed him an apology. His aides stopped asking questions. Some said he was writing a letter to Iran. Others claimed he was reading the Quran, just to understand. Outside, the people stopped calling this an attack. They started calling it a reckoning. Gaza, that word once uttered with either disgust or dismissal, became the subject of dinner table debates. or what was left of dinner tables. Tel Avivians who had never dared cross the border now watched documentaries they once ignored. "Look," one man whispered to his wife, pointing at an old photo of a demolished apartment block in Rafah. "Doesn't that look like our neighborhood now?" Even school children began asking questions their teachers didn't want to answer. Why did they bomb the food? Why are we scared now? Why didn't anyone help us? There were no tidy answers. A group of rabbis issued a public statement calling for humanitarian aid from neighboring countries, even those Israel had once labeled threats. A prominent Orthodox scholar said live on Channel 12, "If the enemy offers you bread, maybe it's time you stopped calling them the enemy." Social media, once saturated with patriotic bravado, now swelled with videos of mutual aid. Palestinians, yes Palestinians, donated boxes of lentils and water filters through Red Crescent volunteers. One viral video showed a man from Jenin taping a note to a care package. "From the people who know what hunger feels like." That video was reposted by thousands of Israelis. One comment under it read, "The missile didn't break us. This did." Even the IDF, normally stoic and stiff-lipped, issued an internal memo warning against inflammatory action. The headline read, "We've lost the narrative. Let's not lose the nation." And somewhere in a refugee camp in Gaza, an old man watched all this unfold on a battery-powered radio. He didn't smile. He didn't cheer. He just nodded and whispered to no one. The difference between justice and revenge is who's left standing after the fire. That night, for the first time in a long time, the skies over Tel Aviv were clear. No drones. No jets. No domes. Just stars. And beneath them, a nation curled into itself. Not defeated, not yet destroyed, but different. Forever.